We say things like casual sex, but there's nothing casual about casual sex. There's always more happening than we are willing to admit. We say one night stand, but the impact of that night can remain in a person's memory, in their body, and sometimes even their sense of self for years. We speak about hookups as if
this desire is deeper than pleasure. Oh, something here is sacred. Yes, something here feels sacred. I love you.
If it's your first time around this neck of the woods, welcome. I am truly glad you're here. This is a space where we explore the deep roots of the ideas that quietly shape our lives. Ideas that shape how we understand ourselves, how we relate to one another, and how we make meaning in our lives. Especially so during those seasons when people are trying to hold together dignity, desire, and responsibility. Qualities that often feel separated in our modern experience. Today, I want to talk about returning to a more grounded understanding of the body. This is the third and final installment in this 3-part series. If you haven't had a chance to watch the first 2 reflections yet, I would gently encourage you to start there, because those 2 will provide the context of what we're exploring today and make it easier to place this conversation within the larger journey we've been tracing together. Now, as we've highlighted before, the subject of human sexuality today is surrounded by so much noise. And frankly, at times it can feel either overexposed or disconnected from meaning in unhealthy ways. But behind the bedlam of noise, there is still a quieter place where human sexuality remains deeply meaningful and deeply important. So today I want us to move beyond the noise, beyond the sensational, and bring forward something that often gets lost in the conversation, which is that sex and meaning are deeply human realities. And by deep, I'm not talking about something technical or difficult to understand. No, not at all. By deep, I'm referring to something foundational to what it means to be human. Something close to the roots of our lives. Something as essential to our sense of connection and belonging as breath is to the body. So, let's talk about it. Now, one of the most important places where we begin to recover that deeper understanding is through understanding something very simple. The body is not separate from the self. Throughout most of human history, people did not imagine the self as something floating somewhere inside the body like a passenger inside a vehicle. In many ancient traditions, including early Hebrew thought, classical African cosmologies, Greek philosophy before its later divisions, and even early Christian theology, the human being was understood as a unified living presence. The body was not something you had, it was something you were. Your body is a part of how you exist in the world. It is the physical, tangible expression of the whole of you. You might even think of it as a container of everything we can locate through science, your heart, your liver, your brain, and also the place through which we experience things we still cannot fully measure or locate in the same way. Your mind, your feelings, and your capacity to love. And when we begin to see the body this way, something extremely pivotal starts to come back into focus. Now follow this carefully. Sexuality was never only physical. It's not penises and vaginas and other physical attributes. No. Even when culture tries to frame it that way, it is not. Even when institutions try to control it that way, it is not. Even when we ourselves try to simplify it in that way, it is not. Sexuality always involved the whole person, not just the physical body. It involves trust, vulnerability. It involves the human need to know and to be known. And this is why I say that when we engage in sex, we are participating in something that is deeply connected to who we are, our very being. And that is why conversations about sexuality should never be only about behavior. They are conversations about what it means to be human. So here's the picture that this paints for us. When human beings share their bodies with one another, when we're sexually intimate, we are never sharing only the physical elements. We're also sharing presence, sharing trust, and so much more. We're essentially sharing parts of ourselves that cannot be separated from who we are. Parts that are part of the operating system of what it means to be human. And because of that, these are parts of ourselves that influence how we make meaning in very significant ways. Have you ever noticed how time almost feels like it slows down when you are in the arms of someone you love? Have you noticed how a good orgasm can leave a person feeling not only physical release, but emotional closeness, calm, and even a deeper sense of connection? Have you noticed how meaningful a relationship can become when there is vulnerability without fear of exploitation? Sexuality is undoubtedly one of the ways human beings access and experience closeness. On the other hand, we also know the opposite experience exists. We know how empty it can feel when there is no mutual vulnerability. How confusing it can feel afterward when the body has been present but the person has not been fully received. How heavy the experience can become when trust is missing. We also know how deeply painful it is when sex is forced upon someone. This is why healing from sexual violation is rarely only physical recovery. It often involves rebuilding dignity, rebuilding safety, and rebuilding the ability to trust one's own presence again. And this is one of the clearest reminders that sexuality has never been only physical. It reaches much, much deeper than that. Look, make no mistake about it. Human sexuality touches something very close to the center of human life because it involves the sharing of selves. And whenever human beings share themselves with one another in that way, meaning is always involved. And yet, Today, many people inherit two very different stories about sexuality. One story treats sexuality as something dangerous, something that must always be restricted, something that must always be monitored. The other story treats sexuality as something casual, something without depth, something without consequency, something disconnected from the person. And many people today find themselves caught somewhere between these two stories, not fully at home in either one. See, I am convinced that what many people are searching for today is not simply more rules or less meaning, but a deeper connection to meaning itself. A way of understanding sexuality that speaks to the whole person, not only anatomy, behavior, or social expectations, but what it means to be human. Because if we're honest, much of today's public conversation about sexuality is focused on mechanics, questions of gender, identity, and social roles. And while those conversations matter, they rarely reach the deeper questions of what gives meaning to our shared humanity. Look, my goal here is not to downplay these cultural conversations, because we certainly do need them. There's an African proverb that says, wisdom is like a baobab tree. No one individual can embrace it alone. Conversations are one of the ways communities gather wisdom together. They are how societies negotiate difference without losing relationship. So, what I'm saying is that I would never want to extinguish what gives life and meaning to our shared humanity. Conversations are one of the ways we remain human together. What I am bringing to the front here is that we do need to think carefully about how societies understand and express sexuality. But if we engage in these discussions without a deeper grounding, without recognizing that sexuality is more than anatomical, more than societal construct, more than something we simply perform, then our conversations slowly begin to deteriorate into confusion, into defensiveness, into finger pointing rather than understanding. However, when we begin to recognize the deeper spiritual patterns present within human sexuality, something is transformed. We begin to honor our shared humanity, and sexuality slowly becomes human again. Not mechanical or ideological. Human. I think one of the quiet invitations in this talk is this: to become more attentive to what it means to be human, to what it means to live in a body, to what it means to share ourselves with another person. And sometimes this begins simply by noticing how the language of modern life quietly pulls us away from meaning. We say things like casual sex, but there's nothing casual about casual sex. There's always more happening than we are willing to admit. We say make love, but love is not something we manufacture. Love is something we learn to recognize, to receive, and to honor. We say one night stand, but the impact of that night can remain in a person's memory, in their body, and sometimes even their sense of self for years. We speak about hookups as if connection were disposable. And we speak about body count as if human closeness can be measured like statistics instead of experiences between persons. When language begins to shrink meaning, our understanding of ourselves begins to shrink with it. So perhaps the other invitation here is simply this: to return to attentiveness, to return to presence, to return to the quiet recognition that human sexuality has always been connected to what it means to be human. And finally, as per the norm around here, if you would like to explore this conversation more deeply, the extended version of this final episode is available on Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. And as always, thank you for being here, because learning what it means to be human truly matters.
Make love to me, hold me close, hold me slow, body and soul. Intimacy was never just touch, it was the soul learning how to speak a language older than time. This desire is deeper than pleasure. This is more than sex, more than physical. Something here is sacred. Yes, something here feels sacred. I love you.